I never imagined that planting a simple tree in my front yard would set off a chain reaction, so massive it would ultimately lead not only to the undoing of someone's carefully constructed facade, but also to the unraveling of her own personal life, and even spark a divorce. It all started when my family and I moved into what we believed would be our dream home, a beautiful, peaceful residence nestled in a quiet, well-kept neighborhood governed by a strict homeowners association. I was excited about the prospect of starting fresh, building new memories with my wife and kids, and maybe even cultivating a small garden of my own. One of the very first things I did was to plant a magnificent maple tree right in the front yard, a living symbol of growth, hope, and the promise of stability. Little did I know that that very tree, meant to represent roots and growth in our new life, would end up becoming the catalyst for a feud that would forever change the dynamic of our neighborhood. In those first few weeks, I was busy unpacking boxes, setting up rooms, and trying to juggle the excitement of a new beginning while managing the little chaos that comes with moving. I spent hours planning exactly where the tree would go, envisioning it as a centerpiece that would not only provide shade for lazy summer afternoons, but also a tangible reminder of the new chapter we were embarking on. The planting day was crisp and sunny, and as I dug the hole for the sapling, a feeling of optimism washed over me. I could almost see it flourishing in time, its branches stretching out as a beacon of life and resilience. I had no inkling that its very presence would be enough to ruffle feathers and ignite a spark of discord among those who held sway over the neighborhood's strict codes. Not long after settling in, I began receiving friendly greetings from a few neighbors and even a brief introduction to the local customs and rules. That is, until I encountered her, Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of every single regulation in our homeowners association. From the moment she introduced herself in an air of unyielding authority, it was clear that she considered it her personal mission to ensure that every blade of grass, every decoration, every shade of color adhered strictly to the neighborhood guidelines. I was out in the yard one afternoon, admiring the young maple tree and imagining the years of comfort it would bring. When I first saw her, she stood at the edge of our property, arms crossed and a steely look in her eyes, as if I had committed some unspeakable act merely by planting a tree. "Hello, I'm Karen, the HOA president," she said, her tone clipped and overly formal. "I noticed you've planted a tree in your front yard without seeking prior approval. That's a clear violation of our community's guidelines." I paused, spat out my surprise, and tried to muster a friendly smile even though I was inwardly seething. "I thought it would add some character and life to the house," I explained, my voice soft but firm. She didn't seem interested in my reasoning. Instead, she launched into a litany of rules and regulations, as if reciting a well-rehearsed script. I nodded along, knowing that arguing might only lead to further complications, so I promised to look into it. Yet deep down, I could tell this was only the beginning of what would become a relentless onslaught from her. The next few weeks turned into a blur of seemingly trivial confrontations. I began to notice little things that, on their own, wouldn't have warranted any serious discussion, like the placement of a small lawn gnome that my daughter had insisted on setting in a cozy corner of the garden. I received a formal notice of violation, and despite my attempts to explain that it was simply a family keepsake, Karen's steely gaze and clipped responses left no room for negotiation. Not even our beloved American flag, which we proudly displayed to honor our heritage, was spared. "The flag clashes with the established neighborhood color scheme," she asserted with a tone that left no doubt about her personal vendetta against any perceived deviation from the norm. I couldn't help but laugh inwardly at the absurdity of it all, yet the sting of her words lingered like an open wound. One Saturday afternoon, as I was enjoying a casual barbecue with a few friends and family in our backyard, the atmosphere was light and convivial, until Karen showed up uninvited. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, and regaling my kids with stories of past misadventures, when suddenly, she stepped over the low fence that separated our yards. Her eyes darted around as if searching for a breach in protocol, and she wasted no time in launching into a tirade. "Your barbecue smoke is wafting into my yard and disturbing the neighbors. I must insist that you take steps immediately to rectify this," she stated, her voice a mixture of indignation and self-importance. I, caught off guard yet trying to maintain my composure, replied in a measured tone, "Karen, it's a Saturday afternoon. We're just gathering with our family. We're not doing anything out of line." Her retort was swift and sharp. "It's about respect and maintaining the standards we all agreed upon," she insisted before turning on her heel and leaving as abruptly as she had arrived. I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. This was a community where even a moment of normal family fun was subjected to an unyielding authority that prioritized regulations over common decency. What truly unnerved me was how Karen's relentless pursuit of perfection in every minute detail began to isolate my family from our neighbors. The tension was palpable at every community event, and whispers began to circulate about my wife and our lifestyle choices. I distinctly remember one evening at a neighborhood potluck when I overheard a hushed conversation between a couple seated at the far end of the long table. The woman said in a barely audible tone, "I heard they don't even maintain their home properly. It's all just chaos." The insinuation stung deeply, especially when it was clear that Karen had been behind these malicious whispers, subtly planting seeds of doubt and mistrust among the residents. I felt an overwhelming sense of injustice, not only for what was done to me, but for the way it was beginning to affect my family's reputation in a community that was supposed to be supportive and united. Amid this brewing storm, there was one unexpected source of solace: Karen's own husband, Tom. Whenever I ran into him while doing yard work or simply walking the dog, he would exchange a few words that seemed far more genuine and sympathetic than those coming from his wife. On one particularly sunny afternoon, while we were both fixing a broken section of our adjoining fence, Tom confided in me. "You know," he said with a resigned sigh, "sometimes I feel like living here is more about following rules than actually being part of a community. I envy the way you all seem to enjoy simple pleasures, like a backyard barbecue or a tree that grows wild and free." I listened intently as he continued, "I'm tired of the constant scrutiny, the endless nitpicking. It's exhausting trying to live up to a standard that doesn't even allow for a little bit of life." His words resonated with me deeply, and for a moment I felt like maybe there was hope that not everyone in that suffocating system was as ruthless as Karen herself. But little did I know, that glimmer of possibility would soon be overshadowed by events that would push our conflict to unimaginable heights. Matters escalated quickly when, one sweltering summer afternoon, Karen took issue with something that seemed utterly absurd: a simple gathering of neighborhood kids playing in our yard. The children were laughing, chasing one another, their voices filled with innocent delight. However, Karen's sharp eyes had already deemed the scene problematic. Later that day, a formal letter arrived from the HOA, accusing us of operating an unlicensed daycare. The letter threatened legal action if we did not cease hosting these daycare activities. I was horrified by the implications, not just because it was baseless, but because it was part of a systematic attempt to portray my family as disruptive and unfit for the community. I could feel my heart pounding as I read through the threatening language, each word a reminder of the ever-present surveillance of our lives. I immediately tried to contact Karen for clarification, but my calls were met with curt, dismissive responses. It was as though she relished the opportunity to amplify our struggles and paint us in the worst possible light. The situation reached its zenith one evening when I decided to document what had been happening. I set up my phone and, with trembling hands, recorded one of Karen's confrontations. I remember it clearly. My wife had been hosting a small, intimate gathering in the backyard, a chance for some relaxation and friendly conversation. As the voices of our guests mingled with the soft strumming of a guitar in the background, Karen appeared at the gate, her face set in a scowl. In a voice that was both cold and sharp, she declared, "Families like yours don't belong here. You flaunt your disregard for the established rules every single day. It's time you learned that respect for the community comes first, no matter how much you think you're entitled." My heart sank as I recorded every word, realizing that these weren't just idle complaints. They were deliberate attempts to humiliate and ostracize us. I later played the recording for Tom, hoping to find solace in his understanding, but instead, he grew visibly upset. "I can't believe she'd say something like that," he murmured, his eyes downcast. "I'm tired of this tyranny. This endless war over nothing. Later that night, as the rest of the neighborhood lay in uneasy slumber, Tom quietly packed a small bag and left his home. He didn't say it was for good, but the weight of the situation had clearly driven him to the breaking point. His departure cast a heavy shadow over the entire community and served as a stark reminder of just how damaging Karen's reign of micromanagement had become. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood grew increasingly tense. One by one, other residents began to come forward with their own stories. Tales of overzealous enforcement of bizarre rules and petty fines that, in isolation, might have seemed trivial, but collectively painted a picture of an oppressive regime. A petition was quietly drafted and circulated among the dissatisfied homeowners, a cry for change in a system that had grown too rigid and unyielding. I found myself at the center of heated conversations, my own experience becoming the rallying point for those who yearned for a more compassionate and understanding way of life in our community. I attended several HOA meetings, where Karen's responses were curt, her justifications mechanical. It became evident that her role as the enforcer was less about maintaining order and more about asserting control over every aspect of our lives. I remember one such meeting vividly. I stood up amidst a room filled with anxious, disillusioned neighbors. I spoke from the heart about what it truly meant to live in a community, the need for empathy, for flexibility, and above all, for understanding that life was messy and unpredictable. Karen's icy glare from across the room was a silent rebuke, a stark contrast to the warmth I felt in the support of others who had endured her overreach. As the tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point, I began to realize that this was not merely a dispute over a misplaced tree or a series of trivial fines. It was a battle for the soul of our community. Each new regulation and each unwarranted fine were symbols of a deeper issue, a fundamental failure to recognize that life, in all its beautiful imperfection, could never be neatly contained within a rulebook. My family and I had become unwilling actors in a drama that was as absurd as it was tragic, and every day brought a new twist in a saga that I never could have anticipated. The final straw, however, came on a brisk autumn day when Karen issued yet another ultimatum, a legal threat that, if not met with immediate compliance, would result in costly litigation. It was at that moment I knew that the time for passive acceptance had ended. I took one final step to reclaim our dignity by confronting Karen head-on, armed with the recorded evidence of her inflammatory remarks and a determination that had been fueled by months of frustration and heartache. Standing outside our home, facing the stern figure who had become synonymous with everything that was wrong in our neighborhood, I spoke with a clarity of purpose born from countless sleepless nights. "Karen," I said, my voice steady, "I will no longer allow your warped interpretation of community standards to destroy my family's happiness. Our home is built on love, laughter, and a genuine desire to live freely without the constant shadow of fear." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps anger, before it was replaced by a steely resolve to continue her campaign of control. I pressed on, recounting every instance of unwarranted harassment, every petty violation that had been used as ammunition against us. With each word, I felt the weight of the past months lifting, replaced by a sense of liberation that was as cathartic as it was necessary. I could see the tension in the room at the next HOA meeting shift, as neighbors began to voice their shared experiences. It wasn't long before the momentum for change became undeniable. In the weeks that followed, the tide turned dramatically. The petition I had once hesitantly signed grew into a resounding chorus of voices demanding accountability and a more human approach to community living. Neighbors who had once been silent in fear of reprisal now stood proudly and united against the tyranny of an overzealous enforcer. It wasn't just about a tree anymore. It had become a battle for respect, for the freedom to live without constant surveillance and judgment. Karen's once unassailable position began to crumble under the weight of collective discontent. The community board, facing an overwhelming display of unity from the residents, had no choice but to take action. After several tense meetings and impassioned speeches from long-suffering neighbors, it was decided that a change in leadership was necessary. Karen was asked to step down from her role as HOA president. In the aftermath, whispers of relief and cautious optimism replaced the stifling atmosphere of fear that had once gripped our neighborhood. I remember the day of the final HOA meeting like it was etched into my memory forever. The room was packed with residents, old and new, each of us eager for a new beginning, for the promise of a community where individuality was embraced rather than punished. As I stood before the assembled crowd, my voice steady and resolute, I recounted the journey we had endured together. We gathered here not merely to remove one person from power, I said, feeling the eyes of so many hopeful faces upon me, but to reclaim our right to live authentically, to celebrate our differences, and to understand that true community is built on compassion and flexibility. Applause erupted, filling the room with a warmth that had long been absent in our interactions. And in that moment, I knew that despite all the hardships, the trials, and the emotional scars, we had managed to forge a new path, a path that honored the human spirit rather than stifling it with draconian rules. Looking back now, I often marvel at how a single act of defiance, a tree planted in the front yard, could have such profound ramifications. What began as a symbol of hope and rootedness transformed into a battleground for values far greater than any piece of property or financial penalty. It exposed the fragility of systems built solely on control and underscored the power of a community united by common purpose. Even more, it forced me to confront a painful truth, that sometimes the very people we least expect to stand with us are the ones who, in their quiet moments of vulnerability, seek a way out of an existence governed by rigidity and fear. Tom, Karen's husband, was perhaps the most poignant example of this. His quiet dissent, a willingness to help me fix a fence or offer a kind word when no one else would, was a reminder that even those shackled by conformity could find their own path to liberation. His eventual departure, though a personal loss for his family, was a catalyst that helped us all see the end of an era. In the wake of these dramatic changes, my family has slowly begun to heal from the emotional toll exacted by months of conflict and strife. Our once uneasy home is gradually returning to a sanctuary of warmth and laughter. The maple tree, now a fully grown testament to the passage of time and the resilience of nature, stands proudly in our front yard, an enduring symbol of transformation and the enduring power of hope. Every time I catch a glimpse of its sprawling branches and the play of sunlight through its leaves, I am reminded of the battle we fought and ultimately won. I realize now that the true victory wasn't in overturning an unjust rule or ousting an overbearing leader. It was in affirming that the spirit of community cannot be dictated by rigid regulations, but must thrive on mutual respect, understanding, and above all, the freedom to be ourselves. Today, as I sit on my front porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the world go by, I find solace in the quiet moments that speak of a hard-won peace. Neighbors now greet each other with genuine smiles and the occasional friendly nod, the air filled with a sense of camaraderie that had long been suppressed. My family, once caught in the crossfire of a petty power struggle, now enjoys a life free from the fear of arbitrary punishment or judgment. I often think back on those tumultuous months with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the pain inflicted by those who chose to wield power without compassion, and gratitude for the strength that emerged from adversity. In a strange twist of fate, the very person who tried to ruin my family ended up paying a high price for her actions. Karen's fall from grace was not just a personal defeat. It was a symbolic victory for everyone who had ever felt oppressed by an oppressive bureaucracy. A reminder that no amount of rules or regulations could ever suppress the human spirit for long. Now, as I reflect on my journey, I want to share one final thought with anyone who might find themselves in a similar predicament. There will always be those who seek to dictate how you live your life, to impose their narrow view of what is right and proper, regardless of your own truths or dreams. But remember, the power to reclaim your narrative lies within you. Stand tall, like the tree that now graces my front yard, and let your roots dig deep into the soil of your beliefs, your values, and your dreams. For in that strength, you will always find the ability to overcome even the most daunting challenges, to rise above the petty conflicts that seek to diminish your light. I share my story not as a tale of bitterness, but as a celebration of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of relentless adversity, hope can flourish. My journey was fraught with moments of anger, despair, and heartache, yet it culminated in a triumph that transcended personal vendettas and petty rules. It was a testament to the enduring truth that when individuals band together and stand up for what is right, even the most formidable oppressor can be unseated. And so, as I plant yet another sapling in my front yard, I am filled with a quiet confidence, a belief that our community, once suffocated by unnecessary regulations, now stands as a beacon of what can be achieved when compassion and common sense prevail over rigid authoritarianism. If there's one thing I've learned over these challenging months, it's that life is far too short to let bitterness take root. Instead, celebrate the small victories, the quiet moments of defiance that remind you to cherish every breath, every smile, every shared moment of genuine connection with those around you. To anyone out there facing a similar battle, I say this: stand up, speak out, and never allow yourself to be silenced by those who thrive on control. The fight for a better, kinder world begins with a single act of courage, a single moment when you decide that your life is worth more than the confines of someone else's misguided rules. As I wrap up my thoughts on these transformative events, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Consider those moments when you felt oppressed, when the weight of unjust expectations threatened to crush your spirit. Now imagine what might happen if you gathered that strength, looked adversity in the eye, and rose above it all. For me, it began with a tree, a family, and the unwavering belief that every human being deserves the freedom to live fully, authentically, and unapologetically. So, as you finish reading the story, I ask you to join in the conversation. Share your own experiences, let your voice be heard, and remind others that even the darkest of times can give birth to the most beautiful of transformations. Stand up for what you believe in, nurture your dreams, and never forget, sometimes the most profound changes start with something as simple and as powerful as a tree planted in the front yard. And while my story might have begun with conflict and hardship, it ultimately reminds us that when we allow hope to take root, nothing can keep us from growing strong. Thank you for listening, and please, if you believe in the power of community and resilience, share this story with those who need to hear it. Let's build a world where compassion triumphs over control, where every tree, every person, is free to flourish in its own unique way.